In the mafia world, there is no room for mistakes. A head that isn't perfect turns into evidence, and the moment your name starts circulating, you're no longer a player, you're a target. That's how New York was run for decades. But when chaos spiraled out of control, when the Italian mafia families started tearing each other apart, fighting over territory, power, and ego, it became obvious. Those old rules weren't protecting the mafia anymore. They were exposing it. And that's when one man stepped in. He unified the mafia for one brutal reason. Chaos only benefits the state. He ended random assassinations, destroyed the idea of the visible boss, and moved real power into the shadows. But the biggest move of all, he didn't just control the mafia. He learned how to control the space between the mafia and the government. To the FBI, he was mentally unstable. To the courts, a danger to himself. But behind that image, New York moved to his rhythm. His name was Vincent Gigante, the man who didn't just run the mafia. He rewrote the rules of how the criminal underworld is ruled. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, New York wasn't a city ruled by law alone. It was running on a fragile balance between the state and 5 Italian mafia families: Gambino, Genovese, Lucchese, Panano, Colombo. These weren't street gangs. This was a full-scale power structure, operating from the heart of the city. New York was the economic engine of America, and the 5 families had their hands wrapped around its arteries. Real decisions weren't made in courtrooms. They were made in closed rooms. Far from cameras, far from transcripts. The government knew. Sometimes it looked the other way. Sometimes it played along. But the real danger wasn't the government, it was internal. Open power struggles. Each family trying to expand its share. Each boss wanting his name to carry more weight. And in that world, even a small disagreement could turn into a war. Chaos became a threat to everyone, even the people who created it. The clearest example was inside the Colombo family. They didn't just fight over money. They fought over how power should work. And out of that split came a name that was different and dangerous: Joe Gallo. Gallo was the opposite of the traditional mafia boss. Loud, public, comfortable in front of the cameras. He talked too much, moved like the rules didn't apply to him, acted untouchable. But in the mafia world, noise means one thing: you're a target. Gallo knew people wanted him dead, but he believed his fame protected him. Until the night of his birthday, Joe Gallo walked into an Italian restaurant in New York. A public place, family around him, people everywhere. No tension, no warning signs. No sense that anything was wrong. Minutes later, 2 men walked in. They moved toward the table like regular customers. No words, no argument, no hesitation. They opened fire right in front of his family. Joe Gallo collapsed in public. A messy hit, loud, sloppy, and the fallout was immediate. The Colombo family weakened overnight. The FBI tightened the net harder than ever. And in that moment, one thing became painfully clear. The mafia didn't need another loud boss. It needed a mind. Someone who ruled from the shadows. And that mind didn't appear overnight. His story started long before these wars. His name was Vincent Gigante. New York, Manhattan, not the Manhattan of glass towers and skylines. This was old Manhattan, Italian neighborhoods, tight streets, places where the law passed through, but rarely stayed. On March 28, 1928, Vincent Louis Gigante was born. The street he grew up on wasn't just a neighborhood. It was known territory, mafia ground. Same faces every day, same last names. And if you were a stranger, people noticed fast. Italian immigrants lived on the edge of the city, and for many of them, the mafia wasn't seen as a crime. It was protection, identity, a way of life. In that word, manhood came down to one question: who are you with? If you were with the crews, you had backing, you had value. If not, you were exposed. Vincent grew up in that atmosphere. As a kid, he saw things no child should see. Street disputes, men disappearing overnight, violence treated like routine. But the hardest blow came early. When Vincent was 5 years old, his father died. Suddenly, the house lost its only shield against the street. His mother tried to hold things together. She worked, she fought. But neighborhoods like that don't show mercy. Vincent grew up knowing that the clean path was the hardest one there was. Around him, mafia men looked like the only version of success. Money, power, respect, and they treated him kindly. Not because they were good people, but because he was Italian. In a country that wasn't fully theirs, they believed in sticking together. Over time, Vincent got closer. He watched, listened, asked very little. But somehow, at that stage of his life, his path took a sharp turn. He found boxing. Boxing wasn't a hobby, it was an escape. From the streets, from the noise, from the expectations. The moment he walked into a gym, people noticed. He was big for his age, solid, calm. Vincent wasn't a flashy boxer. He didn't perform for the crowds. He punched and finished. Some accounts say he was too young to fight officially and used someone else's identity just to get into the ring. Rare for a kid barely 15 years old. He committed to the gym more than anywhere else. He stayed away from bars, stayed away from the mafia hangouts. Cut himself off completely. For the first time in his life, his name started to rise for something that wasn't crime. He saw another version of future. Quieter streets, people who didn't ask who are you with. And a simple dream. To be someone on his own, not someone's soldier. But New York wasn't a city that let dreams like that survive easily. 1947, Vincent was training at the gym when a few men with sharp suits walked in. They spoke calmly. Finish your workout, we will talk after. The entire gym froze. Heads went down. No one asked questions. Vincent kept training. Same rhythm, same focus. When he was done, he walked out with them. And then came the sentence he'd always known would come one day. We want you with us. Vincent said no. At that moment, he could see a future in front of him. His name was rising, his boxing career was real. They tried money next. What you make in a year of boxing, they said. We will pay you for one simple job. Vincent refused again. That's when the tone changed. We don't like forcing people, one of them said. But the ones who refuse usually end up in accidents. Or maybe a single phone call and their careers are over. The message was crystal clear. Refusal is not an option. In that moment, Vincent understood the truth. He had two choices, no third option. Either keep resisting, live the rest of his life under threat, his boxing dream hanging by a thread, every step watched, or accept reality and enter the game. Vincent knew one thing for sure. A direct confrontation would destroy him, and endless refusal would turn him into a permanent target. So he chose survival. Quietly, Vincent walked away from boxing. No announcement, no drama, no farewell fight. He disappeared from the ring and was absorbed into the mafia. The real question is, why Vincent? Why him? To understand that, we need to take one step back. Before all these conflicts, the Italian mafia in America wasn't chaos. It had a system. One system, clear rules. And it was designed by one man. His name was Lucky Luciano. Luciano didn't rule with bullets. He ruled like an architect. He divided the mafia into independent families, created the commission to resolve disputes without bloodshed, and ended the era of the big boss, who killed anyone who challenged him. He transformed the mafia from street gangs into a political economic machine, one that knew how to negotiate, how to apply pressure, how to work alongside the state without burning itself. During that period, violence dropped, profits soared, and the mafia became a silent partner in the American game. That balance made the state lose control because the mafia had evolved to something something far harder to penetrate. 1936, Luciano was taken down, not with bullets, but with charges. Organized prostitution cases were built against him, carefully constructed, enough to bury him. He was sentenced to decades in prison, but after World War II, the deal was made. Luciano was released under conditions and deported to Italy in 1946. On paper, that should have been the end, but in the mafia logic, a boss doesn't stop being a boss just because he leaves the country. Or if he went to jail, a boss stays a boss until he dies. So Luciano did what he had to do. He appointed someone to run things in his place. The choice was obvious: Frank Castello. Castello was Luciano's natural extension. Same philosophy, same mindset. Politics instead of blood. Connections instead of executions. Deals instead of wars. And here is the irony. The government thought deporting Luciano would break the mafia spine. Instead, nothing changed. Same structure, same control, same influence. That's exactly what Vito Genovese couldn't stand. There was real, personal hatred between Vito Genovese and Frank Castello. Genovese was ambitious, aggressive, and convinced the throne belonged to him. He tried taking Castello down legally. Failed. He tried applying political pressure. Failed. He tried framing him for murder and trafficking. Failed again. Castello was smart, protected, and careful. No fingerprints, no trails, no leverage. That's when Genovese realized the hard truth. If Castello was going to be removed, it couldn't be loud. It had to be clean, silent. From someone with no reputation, no public face, and no visible ties to him or to the mafia at all. Someone who could strike and vanish. That's when the name surfaced: Vincent. Genovese didn't approach him directly. He tasted him first. Small tasks, surveillance, and one thing became clear very quickly. Vincent executed and disappeared. No questions, no ego, no noise. Over time, Genovese was convinced this was the man who could end Frank Castello without setting New York on fire. The objective was simple: one job: assassinate Frank Castello and disappear forever. If Vincent succeeded, he entered the game. If he failed, there was no second path, no escape, no retirement. And this is where we reach the moment that changed everything. 3 full days of surveillance. Same timing, same routine. Frank Castello would leave his office, walk a few steps, reach the elevator, then head out to the street. Confident, certain he was untouchable. May 3rd, 1957, the elevator doors opened. Castello stepped out, straight into Vincent's line of sight. 2 seconds of silence, a quick glance, no words. Vincent raised the gun and pulled the trigger. 4 shots, enough to kill any man. Castello collapsed, bleeding heavily, but he didn't die. Vincent didn't run, didn't look back, didn't check. He turned calmly, walked out of the building, and vanished before the guards arrived. Blood left behind and nothing else. New York exploded, not because there was an assassination attempt, but because it failed. 2 bullets hit the shoulder, 1 grazed the head, 1 lodged in the skull without penetrating the brain. By what many called a miracle, Frank Castello survived, and that was the worst possible outcome. Vincent understood the nightmare instantly. The only man who saw his face was the man who's supposed to die. And if Castello talked, New York would burn in a full-scale mafia war. Days passed, heavy days. Investigations, interrogations, pressure from every direction. Everyone waited for one sentence, one name, but Castello shocked everyone. He gathered the bosses and said only this: "I don't know who tried to kill me." And then, something no one expected happened. Castello understood the message. He understood the game had changed, that his presence in the spotlight was now a danger. Not just to him, but to every family. Castello told them he was tired, that he was a new target, and that staying in power would ignite a war no one would win. Then quietly, decisively, he stepped down. He handed control to Vito Genovese. Not because Genovese won, not because Castello lost, but because Castello chose to stay alive and prevent the mafia from tearing itself apart. Some sources say Castello later met Vincent, looked at him calmly, and said something chilling. "I recognized you, but the family's safety comes first." And that was it. Genovese became boss, and Vincent became his true right hand. From that moment on, Vincent was no longer just a trigger man. He was part of the brain. With Genovese at the top, the mafia believed it had won. An enemy removed, power transferred, stability restored. But what followed was the opposite. Castello ruled with politics, with patience. He knew when to ease off and when to apply pressure. Genovese was his opposite. Violent, reckless, obsessed with force over strategy. And then he made the most dangerous decision of his life. He gave near total authority to one man, his right hand, Vincent. Vincent was only 26 years old, young in age, but mentally miles ahead of everyone else. Just 2 years into Genovese's reign, his recklessness caught up with him. He was arrested on narcotics charges and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Genovese remained the leader on paper. Orders still flowed from inside prison walls. Vincent, he executed them. On the street, he was everything. And in 1969, Vito Genovese died in prison. This time, no conflict, no long debate. By consensus, one name was chosen. Vincent Giganti, the new boss. After Vincent became the real mind behind the mafia, he didn't try to rule with blood. He didn't bring back random killings. He did the exact opposite. Murder didn't disappear, but it became conditional, indirect. Dirty work was no longer carried out by Italian mobsters themselves. It went through mercenaries, third parties, intermediaries who moved and vanished without the trail ever leading to the big names. At the same time, Vincent rewrote the rules from the inside. No names spoken, no clear ranks. No one knew more than they absolutely had to. Each layer knew only a small fragment. Decisions moved forward, but the source stayed foggy, almost impossible to trace. The boss was no longer a person, he became an idea. And the result, bloodshed dropped, power expanded with a chilling calm. The state lost. The FBI kept searching for a head and found nothing. No meetings, no signatures, no consistent pattern. And yet, control kept growing. Vincent understood one simple truth. Every system in the world has one weakness: people. You can't eliminate betrayal, you can only delay it. And for years, the machine ran with precision until the state changed its approach. They stopped chasing the boss and started hitting everyone around him. That's when Vincent realized silence alone was no longer enough. But instead of collapsing, he tightened the game. He reduced his presence, expanded the distance, stretched the gap between decision and execution. If one link broke, it led nowhere. The state felt close, but every time it reached out, it grabbed empty air, and it became clear. Vincent wasn't running from the end. He was preparing it on his terms. Because no matter how deep you disappear, there comes a time when your name resurfaces. And when the first official summons arrived, old files reopened, long buried cases pulled back into the light. Vincent knew the legal confrontation had begun, and that it was time to play his final card. He chose madness, but not all at once, because sudden insanity raises alarms. So he dismantled his image piece by piece. Strange behavior sometimes, disjointed speech, empty stares, then back to normal. Someone who saw him once said he was just tired. Someone who saw him twice grew suspicious, and the police confused. Was this a boss or a man falling apart? And while his image collapsed in front of them, the mafia behind him ran cleaner than ever. No blood, no noise, no signature. Short orders, more intermediaries, longer distances between command and action. They sent him for psychiatric evaluations. One doctor, then a panel. The verdict: mentally unstable, unfit to stand trial. On paper, Vincent disappeared. But here was the problem. After his disappearance, nothing stopped, nothing changed. As if the head vanished, but the body kept walking. That's when an investigator said quietly, either this man is truly insane, or he's the smartest person we've ever faced. Vincent started walking openly. No bodyguard, no fear. Everyone saw him. Everyone convinced he was finished. But the truth, he was still in the game, just on a higher level. As if a mind closing doors before the state could reach them. Vincent, for his part, didn't move an inch beyond the role. He stayed in character perfectly. And that created a new kind of fear. Not just for law enforcement, but inside the mafia itself. Fear without a target. Everyone became cautious. Not because they saw a boss, but because they saw nothing. Years passed. The state watched quietly. No raids with his name on them. No public summons. No attempts to shatter his image. Instead, the work changed. It got quieter and much crueler. Files started opening around his family. Clean companies suddenly pulled into suspicion. Endless investigations with no direct charges. The message was unmistakable. We couldn't reach you, but we can destroy your family. And there, for the first time in his life, Vincent began thinking about ending the game. Not an escape. Not a confrontation, not a coup, but a slow transition from ruling behind the curtain to stepping into a legal line of fire. He knew time was no longer on his side, and the state's patience was running out. By the early 2000s, the pressure reached its final stage. Vincent was officially summoned, an ordinary meeting. Routine procedure, nothing suggesting this was the end, until a file blazed on the table in front of him. One file. Inside it, financial charges, evasion cases, testimonies, some fabricated, some documented, all tied to one name, his son, Andro Giganti. There was no threat, no shouting, no show of force, just one brutal truth. If the silence continued, the file would grow, the case would expand, and his son would carry everything. The officer said it calmly. This file guarantees your son rots in prison unless you cooperate. And then, something happened that never happened before. Vincent stopped acting. No madness, no stuttering, no empty stares. He sat upright, calm, his voice steady, and he said one sentence, nothing more. The game is over. In that moment, Vincent chose his ending. He chose to take the final hit himself. To remove himself from the picture, to leave the system he built standing, without destroying those who came after him. He went to prison, not as a boss, not as a legend, not as a symbol. He went in as a man who had finished his role. He gave up no names, blew up no files, sought no revenge. The system continued, just without him, and years later, his life ended the same way he lived its final chapter, quietly. No noise, no final scene, no dramatic collapse. Just an ending for a man who understood something early. The greatest victory isn't defeating the state. The greatest victory is forcing it to watch you for decades and never know what to do with you. And when you finally choose the end, it's on your terms. So the final question, was Vincent insane? Or was he a genius who knew how to live on the edge of the law without falling? And if you were in his place, would you have chosen the same ending? And this was today's story. Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed it, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe if you haven't yet. See you in the next one.